The Zephyrian ship stellar drift moved slowly through the dark space near Kepler 442, its sensors sweeping for anything useful. Captain Vextar had been doing these survey runs for 20 years and had learned not to expect much excitement from the outer rim territories where most expeditions found nothing but empty space and dead rocks. Chief Science Officer Kolani called from her station with a tone that made Vexitar look up from his reports. She was staring at her screen with the kind of focus that meant something interesting had appeared on her scans. The large object ahead of them looked like just another asteroid at first glance, dark and irregular, covered in what appeared to be 10,000 years' worth of cosmic dust and debris. But Kolani's instruments were telling a different story. The readings showed artificial metals beneath all that accumulated space junk, and there were faint energy signatures coming from deep inside the object. These were not the kind of signals that dead rocks produced, and they definitely were not anything that matched the database of known materials used by any current galactic civilization. Xenoarchaeologist Yilmoth joined them on the bridge when they called her up from the research deck. She specialized in ancient civilizations and had spent her career studying the ruins left behind by species that had died out long before the current galactic powers had even developed spaceflight. Her excitement was obvious as she watched the sensor data streaming across the displays. The object was massive, nearly 3 kilometers from end to end, and as they got closer, the accumulated debris made more sense. This thing had been drifting through space for a very long time, long enough for countless micrometeorites and space dust to build up layers of material across its surface. But underneath all that natural camouflage, the hull showed signs of deliberate construction and design. Yilmoth worked for hours trying to make sense of the markings they could detect beneath the debris. The symbols were unlike anything in their databases, but they followed patterns that suggested they represented some kind of written language. When she finally managed to decode part of what appeared to be identification markings, the result sent a chill through the bridge crew. The markings spelled out USS Defiant in symbols that belonged to no known active civilization, and below, that was something even more disturbing: United Earth Defense Force. Everyone on the bridge knew enough galactic history to recognize that name. Earth had been the homeworld of humanity, a species that had been extinct for over 10,000 years. According to official records, humanity had been wiped out during something called the Great Purge, which most history books described as a necessary action taken by the Hegemony Alliance to prevent the spread of a dangerous plague. The humans had supposedly brought the disaster on themselves through reckless experimentation, and their extinction had been swift and complete. But this ship predated their supposed extinction by several centuries, based on the design elements Yilmoth could identify. More troubling was the fact that even covered in debris and obviously ancient, the technology visible in the hull scans appeared incredibly advanced. This was not the primitive technology that history claimed humanity had possessed. Captain Vextar made the decision to board the vessel despite regulations that required reporting such discoveries to the Galactic Council first. His scientific curiosity and the potential importance of this find-out weighed his usual caution about following proper procedures. The boarding party consisted of himself, Kolani, Yilmoth, and a small security team equipped with atmospheric suits and portable life support. The airlock they found was clearly designed for humanoid species similar to themselves, though the control systems used completely unfamiliar interfaces. Yilmoth managed to activate the entry sequence after several hours of careful work, and the ancient mechanisms responded with surprising smoothness for something that had been inactive for millennia. Inside the ship, emergency lighting activated automatically as they entered, suggesting that some kind of power system was still functioning after all this time. The corridors were sized for beings roughly the same height as Zephyrians, but everything about the design and layout suggested minds that worked very differently from their own. The ship appeared to have been designed for both exploration and military operations, with sections clearly devoted to scientific research alongside others that were obviously meant for combat. The technology they found was unlike anything in their experience, showing design principles and capabilities that seemed impossible for a species that had supposedly been primitive when it died out. But the most shocking discovery came when they reached what appeared to be the ship's medical bay. Row after row of sophisticated cryogenic pods filled the large chamber, and according to the readouts they could see, Most of them were still active. The life support system showed that the beings inside were alive, suspended in some kind of stasis that had been maintaining them for thousands of years. Through the transparent panels of the pods, they could see the humans themselves. They looked exactly like the ancient records described. Tall, relatively hairless bipeds with distinctive facial features and what appeared to be considerable muscular development. But these were not the primitive savages that history books had described. Even unconscious and suspended in their pods, they had the look of trained soldiers and experienced space travelers. The discovery that living humans still existed sent shockwaves through Captain Vextar's crew. According to everything they had been taught, humanity was extinct and had been for 10,000 years. Yet here was clear evidence that at least some members of the species had survived their supposed extermination, hidden away in this ancient ship that had been drifting through space completely undetected. The implications were staggering. If humans were still alive, what did that mean about the official story of their extinction? If this ship's technology was as advanced as it appeared, what did that say about claims that humanity had been primitive when they died out? And most troubling of all, if there was one ship full of surviving humans, how many others might be drifting through space, waiting for someone to find them? Captain Vextar made a decision that would change galactic history. Despite every regulation and protocol that said he should report to the Council first, he authorized his medical team to begin the process of reviving one of the humans. They needed answers, and the only way to get them was to wake up someone who had been there when humanity supposedly went extinct. The revival process took nearly 6 hours because the alien medical team had to adapt their equipment to work with completely unknown human physiology. Commander Jake Harrison's cryogenic pod had been maintaining his life for 10,000 years, using technology that the Zephyrian doctors found both fascinating and completely beyond their understanding. When Jake finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw were alien faces staring down at him with expressions that mixed curiosity, fear, and scientific interest. The universal translator device they had placed near his pod was working imperfectly, turning his words into broken fragments that the aliens struggled to understand, while their responses came to him as equally fragmented concepts. The disorientation was massive. Jake had expected to wake up in Earth orbit or perhaps at one of the outer colonies where the Defiant had been scheduled to return from their deep space mission. Instead, he found himself surrounded by species he had never seen before, in what was clearly his own ship's medical bay, but modified with unfamiliar equipment and monitoring devices. Through the struggling translator, Jake learned that he had been asleep for 10,000 years. The number meant nothing to him at first because it was simply too large to process, but as the aliens explained more about the current state of the galaxy, the horrible reality began to sink in. Earth was gone. Humanity was extinct. The civilization he had served no longer existed. Captain Vextar tried to break the news gently, but there was no easy way to tell someone that everything they had ever known was dead and buried under 10 millennia of history. Jake listened to the broken translation of how humanity had been wiped out during something called the Great Purge, how it had been necessary to prevent a plague from spreading, how his entire species was now remembered only as a footnote in ancient history books. But Jake's reaction was not what the aliens expected. Instead of despair or shock, his expression hardened into something that made the Zephyrian security team step back instinctively. When he asked for access to the ship's communication systems, his tone carried an authority that suggested he was used to being obeyed without question. The aliens were amazed by how quickly Jake adapted to their technology. Despite supposedly coming from a primitive species, he grasped complex concepts almost immediately and began operating unfamiliar interfaces with a skill that suggested natural talent combined with advanced training. His physical capabilities were also far beyond what they had expected from the historical records. As Jake worked to access the Defiant's computer systems, he began explaining things that made the aliens increasingly uncomfortable. The USS Defiant had not been fleeing Earth's destruction as they had assumed. The ship had been returning from a classified deep space mission when Earth fell, arriving to find their homeworld already dead, and the solar system patrolled by hostile forces. The crew had made the decision to go into suspended animation to await rescue from other human forces, using cryogenic systems that were designed to maintain them indefinitely. Jake spoke casually about Earth's retribution fleets scattered across the galaxy, multiple battle groups equipped with the same advanced technology that had allowed the Defiant to survive for 10,000 years. What disturbed the aliens most was Jake's matter-of-fact tone when he described these other ships. He talked about them as if their existence was obvious and expected, as if anyone familiar with human military doctrine would know that Earth would never put all its forces in one location where they could be destroyed by a single attack. Revelation that there were other human ships hidden throughout the galaxy sent chills through the Zephyrian crew. If the Defiant's technology was this advanced, and if there were dozens or even hundreds of similar vessels scattered across space, then everything they thought they knew about ancient human capabilities was completely wrong. Jake began activating systems throughout the Defiant that had been dormant for millennia. The ship's power output increased dramatically as advanced reactors came online, and weapon systems that had been hidden beneath the accumulated space debris began extending from concealed ports in the hull. The vessel that had looked like a derelict was transforming into something that clearly belonged in the category of advanced warship. When Jake accessed the communication array, he found what he was looking for. The Defiant had been equipped with a quantum entanglement beacon system that could send instantaneous signals across galactic distances. It was technology that the current galactic civilizations had never developed, and Jake activated it without asking permission from his alien hosts. The message he sent was simple and would be understood by any human ship that received it. It contained identification codes, current galactic coordinates, and a request for status reports from any surviving Earth Defense Force units. Jake explained to the increasingly nervous aliens that this was standard procedure when a ship woke up from extended suspension. Within hours, the first responses began arriving. The battlecruiser Vengeance, under Captain Lisa Morgan, reported operational status from a position 3 sectors away. The stealth ship Shadow Strike, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Ben Carter, acknowledged the signal from its hiding place in a nebula where it had been undetected for thousands of years. More ships checked in as their communication systems received and processed Jake's beacon. By the end of the first day, 17 human vessels had responded to the signal. Each one reported that their crews were alive in suspended animation, their ships fully operational, and their mission parameters unchanged since the day Earth fell. They were ready to resume active duty and wanted orders for how to proceed. The Galactic Council received Captain Vextar's emergency report with growing horror. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Humanity was not extinct, and their technology was far more advanced than anyone had realized. Worse, these surviving humans were clearly military units with capabilities that exceeded anything currently available to galactic civilization. Jake Harrison sat in the Defiant's command center, now wearing his old uniform that had been preserved in his quarters for 10,000 years, and looked at the star charts showing current galactic political boundaries. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something that made even the bravest Zephyrian crew members uncomfortable. He was no longer the confused and disoriented person who had just awakened from cryogenic sleep. He was a military commander whose civilization had been destroyed, and he was very interested in learning exactly who was responsible. The quantum beacon that Jake had activated did more than just send messages to other human ships scattered across the galaxy. It also triggered automatic systems that had been dormant for 10,000 years, systems designed to activate in exactly this kind of situation when isolated human forces needed to reestablish contact with each other after a major disaster. The first ship to arrive was the battlecruiser Vengeance, commanded by Captain Lisa Morgan. Her vessel dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 4842 system, with the kind of precision that demonstrated navigation technology far beyond what the current galactic powers possessed. The Vengeance was larger than the Defiant, and obviously built for heavy combat, its hull bristling with weapon systems that the Zephyrian sensors could not even identify. Captain Morgan's crew had been in suspended animation just like Jake's, waiting for the signal that would tell them it was time to wake up and resume their mission. When she materialized in the Defiance communication room using some kind of advanced teleportation technology, her first words to Jake were a request for a full situation report and an assessment of current galactic military capabilities. The reunion between the two human commanders was brief and professional. They had work to do and 10,000 years of history to catch up on. Lisa brought with her complete records of everything the Vengeance's computer systems had been able to observe during their long drift through space, automated sensors that had continued recording even while the crew slept. More ships continued to arrive over the following days. The stealth vessel Shadow Strike simply appeared in the system without any advance warning, its cloaking technology making it invisible to Zephyrian sensors until Lieutenant Colonel Ben Carter chose to reveal his presence. The heavy cruiser Iron Will dropped out of hyperspace, trailing what appeared to be the wreckage of several alien ships that had tried to intercept it on its way to the rendezvous. Each human commander brought the same story. They had been returning from deep space missions when Earth fell, had found their homeworld already destroyed, and had made the decision to wait in suspended animation for other human forces to re-establish contact. All of them had maintained their ships in perfect operational condition, using automated systems that continued functioning flawlessly across the millennia. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded the Iron Will and was the highest-ranking officer among the survivors. Her ship was a Dreadnought-class vessel designed for independent operations, far from any support base, capable of manufacturing its own ammunition and replacement parts using matter conversion technology that turned asteroids into anything the crew needed. When Kate took command of the growing human fleet, her first action was to establish communication with the major galactic powers. Her message was broadcast on all frequencies and in all major languages, translated by computer systems that had apparently learned every form of communication used by galactic civilization during their long period of observation. The message was simple and direct. The United Earth Defense Force had awakened from 10,000 years of enforced sleep to find their homeworld destroyed and their people extinct. They demanded a full accounting of what had happened to Earth and who was responsible for humanity's genocide. They were prepared to wait for answers, but they would not wait forever. The response from the Hegemony Alliance was immediate and predictable. Military fleets began moving toward human positions with the obvious intent of destroying these unexpected survivors before they could become a larger problem. The Hegemony remembered humans as a primitive species with basic technology that had been easily defeated during the Great Purge. They were completely unprepared for what they found when their first battle group encountered Captain Lisa Morgan's Vengeance at the Proxima relay station. The engagement lasted 4 minutes and ended with the complete destruction of 6 Hegemony warships, while the human vessel suffered no damage whatsoever. Lisa's after-action report was clinical in its description of how human weapons technology compared to current galactic standards. The zero-point energy systems that powered human ships provided virtually unlimited energy for both propulsion and weapons. The exotic matter projectiles fired by human guns passed through enemy shields as if they did not exist, and destroyed targets with single hits. More disturbing was the casual way Lisa described these capabilities, as if the complete technological superiority was exactly what she had expected. Human commanders spoke of their weapons and defensive systems the way someone might discuss routine maintenance procedures, with the confidence of people who had never doubted the outcome of any engagement. Admiral Kate Sullivan established the main human fleet base in deep space between several major galactic trade routes, positioning her forces where they could intercept any military response, while remaining close enough to major population centers to demonstrate their reach. Her flagship Iron Will began manufacturing additional ships and weapons using raw materials, harvested from nearby asteroid fields. The technology demonstration was as impressive as it was terrifying. Human ships that had been alone for 10,000 years were now producing new vessels at a rate that suggested their manufacturing capabilities were essentially unlimited. Each new ship that rolled out of the Iron Will's construction bays was identical to the original vessels in terms of capability and technological advancement. Jake Harrison served as the human fleet's primary contact with galactic civilization, since he had been the first to awaken and had spent the most time interacting with alien species. His conversations with Captain Vextar and other Zephyrian officers provided insight into how the galaxy had changed during humanity's absence and what the current political situation looked like. But Jake's real job was intelligence gathering. Every conversation he had with aliens was recorded and analyzed by human computer systems that were learning everything they could about current galactic military capabilities, political structures, and economic systems. The humans were preparing for war, but they were also gathering the information they would need to win it decisively. The truth about humanity's extinction began to emerge through interrogation of captured hegemony personnel and analysis of intercepted communications. The Great Purge had not been a response to any plague or disaster caused by human recklessness. It had been a deliberate genocide carried out because the hegemony feared what humanity might become if allowed to continue developing. Human technology had been advancing at a rate that terrified the established galactic powers. Earth's scientists and engineers had been making breakthroughs in physics and engineering that threatened to upset the careful balance of power that the hegemony used to control galactic civilization. Rather than compete or try to keep up, they had chosen to eliminate the threat entirely. Admiral Sullivan's response to learning the truth about her species' fate was measured and careful. She called together all human commanders for a conference aboard the Iron Will, where they discussed their options and decided on their course of action. The decision they reached was unanimous and would reshape galactic history. The humans were going to war, but not the kind of war that the galaxy expected. They were not interested in conquest or revenge in the traditional sense. They wanted something far more dangerous to the existing power structure. They wanted justice, and they were going to get it regardless of how many fleets the hegemony sent against them. The first major engagement between human and hegemony forces took place at the Proxima Relay Station, a critical communication hub that connected 17 different star systems. Admiral Rick Coleman commanded the human assault force aboard, his carrier Liberty's Sword, supported by 6 escort vessels including Captain Lisa Morgan's battlecruiser Vengeance. The hegemony had assembled what they considered an overwhelming force to destroy the human ships before they could cause more trouble. 43 warships under Fleet Admiral Zexkoth, including their newest and most powerful dreadnoughts, waited in formation around the relay station. Intelligence reports suggested the humans had only 7 ships, which made the outcome seem certain to the hegemony commanders. The battle began when the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their ships appearing simultaneously at multiple points around the hegemony position. What followed was not the kind of prolonged engagement that galactic military doctrine suggested should happen between roughly equal forces. It was a methodical demonstration of technological superiority that left no doubt about the difference in capabilities. Human weapons fired exotic matter projectiles that ignored hegemony shields and armor, punching through the largest enemy ships as if they were made of paper. The defensive systems protecting human vessels absorbed the heaviest hegemony weapons fire without apparent effect, while their own attacks destroyed enemy ships with single salvos. Captain Morgan's Vengeance alone accounted for 11 enemy vessels. In the first 3 minutes of combat, her weapon systems cycling through targets with mechanical precision. The Liberty's Sword launched fighter craft that moved faster than anything in the hegemony fleet, and carried weapons that could destroy cruiser-sized targets with ease. But the most devastating aspect of human combat doctrine was their use of gravity manipulation technology. Several human ships simply reached out across space and crushed enemy vessels by increasing local gravity to levels that no known material could withstand. Ships that had taken decades to build were reduced to compressed metal spheres in seconds. The engagement ended when Admiral Coleman broadcast a surrender demand on all frequencies. The remaining hegemony ships could choose to withdraw immediately, or be destroyed where they sat. Fleet Admiral Zexkoth chose to retreat, taking his surviving vessels back to hegemony space with a message that would terrify the galactic government. The human fleet did not pursue the retreating enemy ships, which surprised many observers who expected the victorious forces to press their advantage. Instead, Admiral Sullivan had given strict orders that human forces were not to engage in unnecessary destruction or pursue enemies who chose to withdraw. This was not a war of extermination, despite what the hegemony had done to Earth. Admiral Coleman's fleet moved on toward the galactic core where the hegemony maintained its capital world and seat of government. Each system they passed through demonstrated the same pattern. Human ships would arrive, destroy any military forces that chose to fight, and then broadcast demands for information about Earth's destruction and the location of those responsible for ordering the genocide. The truth emerged piece by piece through interrogation of captured officers and analysis of seized computer files. The Great Purge had been planned and executed by the hegemony leadership as a preemptive strike against a species they viewed as dangerously advanced. Internal documents showed that hegemony scientists had been studying human technological development and had concluded that Earth would become a dominant galactic power within a few centuries if allowed to continue advancing. Captain Sam Rodriguez commanded the assault ship Retribution, one of the most heavily armed vessels in the human fleet. His ship specialized in close-range combat and boarding operations, designed to capture enemy vessels and their crews rather than simply destroying them. Sam's interrogation techniques were thorough and effective, and the information he extracted from hegemony prisoners painted a clear picture of how humanity's extinction had been planned and carried out. The genocide had not been a military necessity or a response to human aggression. It had been a calculated decision to eliminate a potential rival before that rival became too powerful to defeat. The hegemony had struck first because they knew they would not be able to win if they waited for humans to develop their full technological potential. But the hegemony had made a critical error in their planning. They had assumed that all human forces were concentrated around Earth and the inner colonies, and that destroying the Sol system would eliminate the entire species. They had not known about the deep space exploration fleets that were scattered across the galaxy, equipped with the most advanced technology Earth had been able to develop. These exploration fleets had been part of a classified program designed to establish hidden bases throughout the galaxy in case Earth ever faced an existential threat. Each fleet was equipped with construction ships capable of building industrial facilities from raw materials, military vessels designed for independent operation, and cryogenic systems that could maintain crews in suspended animation for indefinite periods. Jake Harrison had been part of this program, though his mission had been cut short when Earth fell before the Defiant could establish its assigned deep space base. The other human commanders had similar stories. They represented the most advanced and well-equipped military units Earth had ever produced, sent to the far reaches of space specifically to ensure human survival in case of disaster. The irony was not lost on human commanders that the hegemony's attempt to prevent humanity from becoming a galactic power had instead created exactly what they feared most. The scattered human fleets had spent 10,000 years in isolation, their automated systems continuing to develop new technologies and improvements while the crews slept. They had awakened stronger and more advanced than they would have been if Earth had survived. Admiral Sullivan established her main base at the edge of hegemony space, close enough to their capital world to demonstrate that human forces could strike at the heart of their government, but far enough away to avoid appearing to threaten immediate invasion. Her message to the Hegemony Council was simple and direct. The humans wanted justice for the genocide of their species, but they were willing to pursue that justice through legal means rather than military action if the hegemony was prepared to cooperate. They demanded full disclosure of everyone who had been involved in planning and executing the Great Purge, and they wanted those individuals turned over for trial under galactic law. If the hegemony chose to refuse these demands or attempted to continue military resistance, the human fleet was prepared to take whatever action was necessary to achieve their objectives. Admiral Sullivan made it clear that human patience was not unlimited, and that their willingness to pursue legal solutions depended on hegemony cooperation. The response came in the form of the largest military force the hegemony had ever assembled. More than 200 ships from 6 different species moved toward human positions with the clear intent of destroying the surviving Earth forces through overwhelming numbers. The hegemony leadership had decided that negotiation was impossible, and that military victory was their only option. They were about to learn why that decision was a mistake that would cost them everything they had spent 10,000 years building. The final battle for Nexus Prime lasted 3 hours and 27 minutes from the moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace until the moment hegemony forces broadcast their unconditional surrender. Admiral Sullivan had brought 23 ships against the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, and the outcome was never in doubt. The humans did not fight like any military force the galaxy had ever seen. Their tactics were precise and surgical, designed to disable, rather than destroy wherever possible. Ships that surrendered immediately were boarded and their crews taken prisoner. Vessels that continued to fight were systematically dismantled by weapons that could selectively destroy engines, weapons systems, or life support without harming the crew compartments. Captain Jake Harrison commanded the boarding parties that secured the hegemony government complex on Nexus Prime. His teams moved through the massive structure with the efficiency of soldiers who had trained for exactly this kind of operation, securing key officials and government records while avoiding unnecessary casualties among civilian workers. The capture of the hegemony leadership was swift and complete. Within 6 hours of the battle's end, every individual who had been involved in planning or authorizing the Great Purge was in human custody. Computer files seized from government archives provided complete documentation of how the genocide had been planned and executed, including the names of everyone who had participated. But Admiral Sullivan's strategy went far beyond simple military victory. The real assault began when human ships started broadcasting the truth about the Great Purge to every world in the galaxy. The official story that humanity had died from a plague of their own making was exposed as a complete fabrication, while the real reasons for their extinction were revealed in horrifying detail. The reaction across galactic civilization was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had been told they were partners in a grand alliance discovered they had been living under the rule of genocidal tyrants who had murdered an entire civilization to protect their own power. Worlds that had contributed ships and resources to the Great Purge learned that they had been manipulated into participating in history's greatest war crime. Jake Harrison addressed the reformed Galactic Council from the podium where hegemony leaders had once issued their decrees. His words were translated into every major galactic language and broadcast to billions of beings across thousands of worlds. The message was simple but profound in its implications for how galactic civilization would function going forward. Humanity represented the last survivors of a species that had been murdered for the crime of being too successful and advancing too quickly. They could have chosen revenge and used their superior technology to repay genocide with genocide. Instead, they had chosen to pursue justice through legal means and to ensure that no other species would ever face the same fate that had befallen Earth. The war crimes tribunals that followed were unlike anything galactic history had ever seen. Human legal experts worked with representatives from every major species to establish courts that would judge those responsible for humanity's extinction according to laws that had been violated when Earth died. The trials were conducted with scrupulous attention to legal procedure and the rights of the accused. Many hegemony officials were found guilty of crimes against sapient life and sentenced to imprisonment on worlds where they would spend the rest of their lives working to repair the damage their policies had caused. Others who had been deceived or coerced into participation were given lighter sentences or released after providing testimony about how the genocide had been planned and carried out. But the most important outcome of the trials was not the punishment of individuals. It was the establishment of legal precedents and galactic institutions designed to prevent future genocides. The Human Rights Commission was founded with representatives from every species and backed by the military power necessary to enforce its decisions. Captain Lisa Morgan took command of the enforcement fleet that would patrol galactic space looking for signs of species-level persecution or attempts at genocide. Her ships carried sensors capable of monitoring entire star systems and weapons, powerful enough to intervene decisively if any government attempted to repeat the hegemony's crimes. The surviving humans made a collective decision that surprised everyone who had been following their campaign for justice. Rather than establishing a new human government or attempting to rebuild their extinct civilization, they chose to dedicate themselves permanently to protecting other species from suffering Earth's fate. The Terra Memorial Fleet became the galaxy's guardians against genocide, their advanced ships patrolling the void with crews who had volunteered for permanent service protecting emerging civilizations from the kind of preemptive strikes that had destroyed their own species. They established bases throughout galactic space but never claimed territory or attempted to rule other peoples. Jake Harrison returned to Earth's ruins aboard the Defiant, leading a small fleet of human ships on a pilgrimage to the place where their species had been born. What they found was a dead system where planets had been cracked open, and their remains scattered through space to ensure that nothing could ever grow there again. The monument they built in Earth's orbit was simple, but powerful in its message. A single structure made from materials that had once been part of Earth itself, carrying the names of every human being who had died during the Great Purge and the words that would define humanity's legacy for as long as galactic civilization endured. The inscription read simply, "Here stood humanity's birth world, home to 7 billion souls who died for no crime but dreaming of the stars. We who survived chose justice over revenge, law over war, protection over conquest. We are the guardians now, and we remember. The galaxy belongs to all who dare to reach for tomorrow." Species throughout the galaxy began to understand that they were living in a fundamentally different universe than the one that had existed before the human ships awakened. The balance of power had shifted permanently toward those who valued justice and the protection of the innocent over the accumulation of power through force. Young civilizations developing spaceflight found human ships appearing in their systems, not as conquerors or exploiters, but as protectors offering technology and guidance to help them avoid the mistakes that had once made genocide seem like a reasonable policy option. The humans shared their advanced science freely, but always with the understanding that it came with responsibilities. Admiral Sullivan established the final human base in deep space, between several major galactic trade routes, positioned where the Terra Memorial Fleet could respond quickly to threats anywhere in known space. Her ships continued to manufacture new vessels and train new crews, but their mission remained the same, ensuring that the word extinct would never again apply to an entire sapient species. The galaxy had learned that some things were more dangerous, sleeping than awake, and that humanity's survivors had awakened not as conquerors seeking revenge, but as guardians determined to ensure that the stars would always belong to those who dared to dream of reaching them rather than those who feared what others might accomplish if given the chance to try.